Canon's new RF lenses are incredibly good, and the RF 85mm Macro IS STM is no exception. It's fairly cheap at a little under $600, and it is not an L series lens, but it still has become one of my favorite lenses to use ever. Honestly speaking, I wasn't expecting to get a lens this good when I bought it, but now that I've used it for 1.5 years, I have fallen in love. And personally, I would actually never buy the RF 85mm f1.2 L series lens for over $2,000 more now that I know how good this lens actually is. Before going any further, I just want to make it clear that I'm not sponsored by Canon in any way. I bought this lens with my own money and these are my honest opinions, so let's get to it. First of all, optical quality. I can't really say anything bad about the image quality of this lens. The images you get out of it are extremely sharp, there's really no distortion or any noticeable vignetting in real life situations. I feel like everything I point this lens at just looks really good. The L series lens should be superior in terms of image quality, but I don't think you would be disappointed with the image quality of this lens anyways. This lens is just really damn good in terms of image quality. Next up is focusing, which is actually the biggest weakness of this lens and the one area where the L series lens will crush this one. The 85mm f2 uses Canon's STM technology, and it's perfectly fine if you're shooting photos at a medium to long range distance of your subject. But it's very slow in video mode and it may struggle when going macro, but in my experience the issues haven't been too bad. I have however heard of people returning this lens because of the autofocus issues, but personally I haven't had anything major with it. I think it's really accurate and it's fast enough for me in photo mode, but just note that the focusing system of this lens isn't Canon's best or fastest. The lens also has a focus limiter switch, which you should definitely be using to let the lens know how far your subject might be to make the autofocus work properly. And I would always use manual focus while shooting macro. Going from macro to a telephoto distance focus or vice versa with this lens takes forever, especially in video mode, and you definitely do not want the lens to start hunting for focus. Also, manually focusing from far away to macro or vice versa takes forever. One thing to also note is that the lens actually extends out while going macro, and it does make a bit of noise with the autofocus in photo mode. Next up, let's talk about macro. The RF 85mm f2 is a macro lens, but it's not actually true macro. It gives you a 1:2 or a half life-size magnification ratio, which at least for me is well enough in most cases. Its closest focusing distance is 35 cm, which will get you really close to your subject, but it won't give you full 1:1 macro ratio. I really love the fact that I can get those macro shots with this lens. The L series lens actually doesn't have any type of macro capabilities, so it's a clear win for the f2 lens. So what about the build quality? As the RF 85mm f2 is not an L series lens, you can really feel it in the way it's built. It feels a bit plasticky, but it actually is a kind of a good type of a plasticky feeling. The lens does feel really good, but you can feel that it's not an expensive lens, and it only weighs 500 grams, which actually is something that I really like. The L series lens is more than twice as heavy, which for me is a negative, even though I know it would kind of feel better in the hands. As this one is not an L series lens, it doesn't have any type of weather sealing and it doesn't come with a lens hood, which is a bummer. Canon's L series lenses always have weather sealing and exceptionally good build quality, so you definitely feel a difference between the f2 and the f1.2 L lenses. But after all, it's not about how the lens feels in your hands, it's what the lens can do. Now, one thing this lens has that the L series lens doesn't have is image stabilization. You can combine the IS with the IBIS of the R series cameras, which works really well, and I'm happy to shoot handheld with this lens. Obviously, macro shots will have a bit of shake in them even with the IS, and you won't get a long exposure macro shot with this lens handheld. For everything other than macro, however, the stabilization is magical. All of the B-roll in this sequence was shot handheld with this lens, and there is no stabilization added in post. As it's an 85mm lens, you're not really going to suffer from the IBIS wobbling issues either, because that's more a wide-angle lens issue. So what about the maximum aperture? One of the main differences between this lens and its L series bigger brother is the aperture. The L lens goes all the way up to f1.2, but do you really need an aperture that wide? Canon's R series cameras are really good with high ISOs, and f2 is already quite wide, so noise and shooting in dark scenarios should not be an issue at all. At 85mm, you're also going to have really shallow depth of field at f2, so personally I don't think you would ever need to go wider than that. If you take macro shots at f2, you're going to have an extremely hard time trying to get your subject in focus, so in my use at least, f2 is more than enough. So all in all, is the RF 85mm f2 Macro IS STM lens enough for you, or should you buy the 85mm f1.2L lens for more than $2,000 more? Personally, I would never get the L series lens at that price point compared to the 85mm f2 that I have. The image quality of this lens is really good. As for the aperture, sure you would gain a bit more light, but I don't see any reason why I would actually need anything more than f2. The L lens also doesn't have IS, which is something I really love for my handheld video work, and it can't focus nearly as close as the 85mm f2 can. The L lens is also more than twice as heavy, which is something I don't like. Then again, the RF 85mm f2 is not weather sealed and it doesn't have best focusing out there, so if that's something you need, this is not the lens for you. All in all, I think this lens is extremely good for its price and I couldn't be happier about owning this lens. For me, the weight, IS and macro capabilities are definitely reasons why I would still get this lens over the L and maybe travel the world with those $2,000. If you have any questions about this lens, just drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching and I hope I will see you in the next one.